Welcome to FemLead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. This show aims to inspire and equip you with the tools you need to navigate your career plans. FemLead brings inspiring career perspectives and strategies to guide your path to success. Your host, Alexandra, will interview role models on new, exciting topics with each episode. If you like what you hear, give us a review and subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of FemLead Podcast. My name is Alexandra Ciobotaru. I am your host, and I want to thank you for continuing to listen in. This is season number 5, and this is the first episode of our third year of activity. I look very much forward to be sharing with you very inspiring discussions, and of course, I look forward to building this community even further with your support. The podcast is an empowering platform that celebrates the stories of extraordinary women who are shaping the world through their vision, resilience, and unwavering commitment. In each episode, we aim to dive into the journeys of women who have broken barriers, shattered glass ceilings, and paved the way for a brighter future. Today, we are honored to introduce to you Ambassador Emma Kate Hopkins OBE, a remarkable diplomat and advocate whose remarkable career has been defined by her passion for justice and equality. Ambassador Hopkins took up her post as His Majesty's ambassador to Denmark in October 2020. Prior to this, she served as Her Majesty's ambassador to Bulgaria from 2015 to 2020. For those of you who have any doubt, I'm talking about, of course, the British Embassy. Whilst in Bulgaria, she was also the senior leader for organized crime and rule of law projects in Central and Eastern Europe. Ambassador Hopkins is an extraordinary diplomat and leader dedicated to justice, human rights, and global change. From a criminal barrister to a trailblazing diplomat, Her Excellency's journey embodies resilience and impact. As leader of the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, she earned an OBE, otherwise known as the Officer of the Order of the British Empire, for her commitment to ending impunity for warzone rape. Her expertise spans immigration, human rights, and more, cultivating in a UK strategy on human trafficking. Her Excellency's personal passions include travel, running, and scuba diving. As His Majesty's ambassador to Denmark, she continues to shape a brighter future, building on her impactful role in Bulgaria. Join us as we uncover Her Excellency's exceptional story of advocacy and dedication. I'm so thrilled to be sharing this episode with you, and I want to share how grateful we are that Her Excellency's team invited us to interview Ambassador Hopkins and is promoting constantly FemLead Podcast as a platform for supporting women and spotlighting role models. I hope you'll enjoy this interview. This has been an honor to record, but also a great interview to share with the world. Your Excellency, thank you so much for inviting us. Welcome to FemLead Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased that you're here.
Thank you for inviting us at your residence. We are really grateful that we are here. I want to share for our audiences that you have been very welcoming in supporting local initiatives in Denmark, and you have invited us to a couple of events before that promote women in their careers, but also role models for the young generations. So a personal thank you for inviting us and for giving us this opportunity. This is really a big milestone for us.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted, and I love to support female-led initiatives, and your podcast is one of those. So it's great to see women taking the initiative to do projects like this outside of their day jobs, alongside their other commitments. So I always look forward to supporting other women who are forging their own way in the world.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So we've shared a little bit about your background, of course, and your current setup, but we would like to go back to the early starts of your career. And the aim today is to navigate our audience through your impressive career and also spotlight some of your initiatives. We really want to say that within our local community, you have a big impact. So I hope that through this interview, we will also be able to share that role models are all over and are very close to our communities, and really inspire more people to shed light on them. I'm very excited and also supportive of that. So, Your Excellency, Your transition from a successful career as a criminal barrister to becoming a distinguished diplomat is intriguing. So what prompted this shift in your professional journey, and how has your legal background enriched your diplomatic endeavors?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think I started off as a lawyer, and I always had an interest in law, especially human rights law. And so the first or early part of my career was very much focused on being a barrister and going to court, representing people. And then when I was in about 6 or 7 years after qualifying, I had realized that actually I wanted to do more than just represent individuals. I wanted to advise on policy, on bigger questions. I wanted to work more on human rights. And so I left the bar and I took a job for the government. And it was just a week before 9/11 happened. And I was working for the Home Office, and a week later 9/11 happened. And then I had 10 years of working on legislation relating to terrorism, national security, asylum, organised crime, prisoners, and very rich and full sort of legal experience. And then towards the end of that period, I had children. And coming back from children, I suppose I was just reevaluating what I wanted to do. And I watched a film called Sex Traffic, which was a film about 2 girls from Moldova who were trafficked to the UK. And it had a profound impact on me. It was, in fact, a series from the ITV. And I thought, well, I want to work on that issue. I can't believe we live in a world where people are subject to this form of slavery, perhaps in the house next door to mine. And a job happened to come up to develop the first strategy for the UK on human trafficking. So I applied for it and I was lucky enough to get it. And that really was my transition away from law into more of a policy operational role. And after that, I'd done that role for a few years. I had another child, and coming back from that second maternity, I had another eureka moment when I was thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going back to be a lawyer? And at that stage, there was a campaign on rape in war that our foreign secretary wanted to start, and they wanted somebody to lead that campaign. And so I applied for that, and I was lucky enough to get it. And after working on that for a few years, and I was in my early 40s at the time, at the end of that, I was asked whether or not I had thought about diplomacy and whether or not I would like to apply for a job as ambassador to Bulgaria. And I said, yes, I would like to apply. And there were lots of synergies with Bulgaria. There's a big focus on organised crime and trafficking in that region. So it had some natural connection with my experience. And so I said yes. And so it's been a sort of not a straightforward line, but definitely a line away from representing individuals to working on bigger policy issues with, I think, a sort of wider remit.
Mm. It's really impressive. Thank you for sharing. You've mentioned luck a couple of times, but you are also very passionate. You seem passionate and you talk passionately about topics that are close to what you're trying to achieve. Do you think that it had to do with your passion, the fact that these opportunities came together and then...
Also massive privilege. You know, I mean, I come from a very loving, supportive family. I was lucky enough to be educated in Cambridge. I went to a comprehensive school, but I had every advantage that a loving family can give you. So there's lots of privilege there. And of course, luck is part of it. But I suppose being open to challenge and risk is another thing that's important. And I think it is all a journey. When I think back about working as an ambassador for the last 8 or 9 years, some of the things that I think are most useful in this career is actually my legal experience, because I use every day the skills I acquired. I mean, because ambassador, you have to represent a country. You could be talking about wind power in the morning, AI in the afternoon, or war crimes in Ukraine in the evening. So it's such a wide range of topics. So you have to suddenly understand and read a lot of briefing and then be able to sensibly, talk about some of those issues. So that's the kind of skill that you develop as a lawyer. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to get a trial up for the next day, you just get given a trial at the last minute. You have to read all the evidence to be able to go into court in the morning and represent your client. So that's been useful. The second thing I think that it's done is give me credibility. So when I was in Bulgaria, I was regularly talking to the Prosecutor General about corruption, about organised crime. And the reason I think he didn't mind talking to me is because I had prosecuted cases. So I understood what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is useful to be able to have that deep and rich expertise, because so much of diplomacy is generalized. So I think in order to have credibility, it is useful to be able to talk with real experience on some issues. And I think that does give you better access.
Absolutely. That was one of my follow-up questions. So thank you for enriching us also with actually the understanding of how one can use its skill for a broader range of opportunities, because that is something that you have experienced in your career. But now looking back, there you are able to also emphasize episodes and situations where that came very much in hand. So that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let's talk a little bit about the initiative called Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative that you have mentioned before. Can you tell us about the origin of this initiative and what you had to put forward in order to raise awareness about warzone rape and advocating for justice for survivors?
This was an initiative that came out of a film that Angelina Jolie shot called In the Land of Blood and Honey in 2010-11. Based on the experiences in former Yugoslavia of the treatment of Muslim women in some of the rape camps. And it was a very powerful film. And at that time, our foreign secretary was someone called William Hague. And he had a special advisor called Arminka Helic. And she was a refugee from Bosnia who had escaped across the border with her family. And she was a strong advocate for justice for the victims of sexual violence in the former Yugoslavia. And she showed this film to William Hague. William Hague subsequently met Angelina Jolie. They both determined, and Angelina was always working on this issue already in her role, many roles that she hosts with the UN HCR. And they were determined to do something about it. So he very much wanted to use the work of Foreign Service to raise a spotlight, to use some of the multilateral fora like the UN, the G8, to raise this issue, to think about practical measures. Because the reality at that time, and really still today, is that in 99.9% of war zones, rape and sexual violence go with complete impunity. So there's no justice, whether national, local, international justice for most survivors of sexual violence. And so we were trying to address that issue. And so they wanted someone to lead the campaign, to start the initiative, build the team. And so I was recruited to do that. I'd led a campaign on human trafficking internationally, so I had some experience on trying to influence in that way. And I think there are a few points in your career where a number of things connect at the same time. You have somebody of the political heavyweight that the Foreign Secretary William Hague was. He was a real political heavyweight. You had Angelina Jolie with star power and the ability to convene from a celebrity perspective, a real passion for these issues. You had money and funding that could support some of the work. And in that period that we worked on that initiative over those few years, all of those things came together. So it felt like it was a real opportunity to make progress. And what was wonderful about that campaign is it had a diplomatic level, which was all about working, using the G8 presidency to make a strong statement, using the UN to pass resolutions. It also had this legal aspect, which is all about developing a protocol on how you investigate in war zones. It's very difficult to pull evidence and information together about war zone rape. And then the last element was this practical team of experts that are used to deploy to post-conflict war zones in order to build capacity about how you actually investigate. So those three aspects were a crucial part of the campaign. So it was a sort of a real sprint because we really felt that we had to seize the moment. So there was a real desire to make progress quickly. So we did a number of things in the UN, international projects. I put together a global summit, which was the largest summit ever that the UK had hosted at that time. We had over 120 countries that come, I think, many ministers. We had a massive fringe of events which were supposed to creatively show the impact on survivors through art, drama, music of what it means to actually have had this experience on your life going forward. So it was very much about trying to improve understanding, as well as really doing some concrete things to move the dial. So it was a sort of tremendous professional experience, but really one of those few times in your career where you feel that the stars have aligned to try and address an issue collectively.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Very impressive. Thank you. In the context of international diplomacy, how do you then believe that we can continue to amplify women's voices and prioritize gender equality on a global scale?
If you think about what's going on at the world at the moment, I mean, we are, instead of going forward, many of the steps forward are now regressing. So if I think about female reproductive rights, if you think about the countries in the world that are now restricting access to the right to abortion and the right to a woman to determine what happens to her own body, that they're going in reverse. So I suppose on a global level, I feel a little bit pessimistic about some of that. I felt that some of these rights were hard won, and I thought we banked these rights. So I do feel more pessimistic about that. And if you think about the World Economic Forum ranking, it'll be 130 years before we achieve gender equality in all the different fields, economic, political, social. So against that backdrop, what can we do? I mean, I think for me, I think, is it Ruth Bader Ginsburg who said that women belong in every room where decisions are made. And as a diplomat, I really feel that is a challenge for me to try and advocate for that. So to advocate that whether it's a peace agreement, it's a panel discussion, it's a delegation visit, all of that should be equally and balanced in terms of its representation. So I have a role to advocate for that, and I should use my position to do that. So I think there's lots to do globally on gender equality, and this is the moment where we can't let it slip back. So I do think there is at the moment quite a call for action to step up and to do more.
Absolutely. And seeing initiatives and following up on what was decided as important is also part of that, so that we start and then we continue to impact. And we will talk very soon about the programs that you lead in this regard. We are we're very happy to hear that they continue and that we can now share some details. But before that, I would like to go back to a time where you were an ambassador to Bulgaria, and you've mentioned already that you were involved in tackling organized crime and strengthening the rule of law. Could you share an example of a project or initiative that you led that exemplifies your commitment or the commitment of within your setup to these vital issues?
I mean, it was a real privilege. I love Bulgaria, by the way. I mean, what a fabulous country. I loved being posted there. And I had the privilege when I was there to be leading our work in the sort of 9 countries in that region on rule of law, where we were doing a lot of work with the host governments to tackle some of the things that were being smuggled up through the region, whether it was guns, money, people. But one of the things I particularly focused on was human trafficking, given my background previously. And we did a number of projects which were designed to raise awareness from different sectors of society across Eastern Europe who might think about migrating for labour, who might think about taking a job in another country in Western Europe. And just to sort of advertise some of the risks identified through that. So what is it that you have to look out for? What should you be careful of? What should you look at in terms of an advert? We also did a lot of training on border officials about indicators for people who may or may not be trafficked. Because I think research shows, and through these projects we did, there's always this optimism bias. So people believe, well, that happens to someone else, but that won't happen to me. I have a job in a restaurant in this country. You know, I'm not going to be trafficked into prostitution. I know that, you know, this job is for me and I'm going to be fine. And then the reality turns out to be very different. So how is it that you can influence that decision making away from that sort of optimism bias, you know, by trying to give some facts and figures about the things that you need to look out for with adverts, things to be careful of. But it's very difficult to try and have an impact from the prevention point of view, because of course, once someone has been trafficked, the impact on them personally is catastrophic, and on their family. Of course, you want to intervene earlier down. You want to prevent them getting into that situation. So we work very much on trying to dismantle some of those operations that try to recruit victims, as well as trying to equip people who may be thinking of migrating or be in vulnerable positions with other options. So that was a really interesting area of work, and one that the embassy had worked on for quite a long time across the region.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. You talk about navigating complex international environments and partnerships. And you, of course, work across borders. Well, I would like to ask, how do you approach fostering cooperation among nations to combat organized crime and promote the rule of law?
Well, I mean, it all comes down to trust. So in order to work effectively with law enforcement organizations in other countries, you have to trust each other. And that's built up through patient diplomacy. I mean, you have to work together, you have to understand, you have to listen. And sharing intelligence is a very sensitive area. So there's a lot of trust that's required. And I think you also have to have quite a keen understanding of what you bring to partners. You know, what is it that the UK are valued for? And we are valued very much for our extensive security capabilities, you know, our security services, our police network overseas, our national crime agency. This is a real strength of the UK. And so a lot of our partners in the region value what we can bring in terms of capability. So it's having a keen understanding of that, as well as an understanding of what it is that the partner is trying to achieve. But it doesn't happen overnight. These things happen over many years, and you need to be in the country, working in the country, understanding your partners in order to achieve something together. But we had lots of good results sort of locally and regionally, where we were able to make progress, to dismantle organized crime rings, to seize assets, to disrupt activity to the benefit of people who may or may not have been victims of that group.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing. You have had a impressive career, as I've mentioned, from human rights to immigration, international law. It spanned various and critical arenas. What advice would you offer to aspiring women diplomats seeking to build a diverse and impactful career?
Well, I think I'd say when I was growing up, you thought about just having what was going to be your career. So one career. Mm-hmm. But I think over the years, nobody has just one career anymore. I think the question is, what do you want to do first? And actually change is almost inevitable these days over the course of your working life. So I think I'd say, think not just about the rest of your life, but just about your first step, because then it can be easier to sort of conceptualize. The other thing is that I became a diplomat in my 40s. So I'd had a lot of working experience before that, and I had never even thought about being a diplomat. I wish I'd known about diplomacy earlier, because it's such a fantastic career. So I would also say, think about your career anchors. So the things that are going to be at the core of the decisions you make about your career, the things that are sort of grounded in your values, the things that make you want to get out of bed for. And it doesn't always have to be a vertical progression. So many of the jobs I've taken have been sideways moves because I've been so interested or passionate about the role, or because I've had to put food on the table. You know, so it's not always this vertical movement up. And if you put yourself under that pressure, then sometimes you're going to miss out on opportunities that might be in the margins.
I'm so happy you've mentioned that reflection, because our vision is to empower women to map out their way to a fulfilling career. And sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to already know from an early age how a fulfilling career will look like, without having experience and without knowing whether the field you're going into after university is actually something you would like, because you have not had that experience yet. And years down the line, you know, you discuss, you consider maybe, should I have done something else? But in looking back also from your reflections, maybe also the mindset should be, how can I use the current experience that I have, or the different sort of experiences I've managed to gather to go to the next level or to the next career? And I'm very happy you've mentioned it, because I feel it gives people, but of course women also, more confidence maybe to know that there is a way forward if you start working towards something. So don't be afraid to try out maybe a new career, set up maybe a new type of job that you would not consider, or pick up the phone when that friend tells you, I think your profile can fit an area that you maybe didn't think about, right? So
I mean, it's about risk, and traditionally, women, there's lots of research which suggests that women are more risk averse, but society tries to condition us in that way. But there is no real bad experience. I mean, the jobs that I've done that I haven't particularly liked, I've still learned a lot from them. I mean, I've learned a lot about myself and what I like and what I don't like in the next job that I pick. So I think you have to think about everything is enriching in the sense of your career and your experience. And actually, sometimes bad examples of leadership teach you more than good examples of leadership, because you know what the impact was on you of a certain behavior. So I agree. I think being not scared to take risks or chances, and being open to what you might learn. I think some of the biggest reflections I've probably had, and my skill and ability to do that has definitely developed over the years. I certainly wasn't as open as when I was younger than I perhaps am now.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Can you recall, on that note, a particular diplomatic achievement or breakthrough that you believe has contributed significantly to your legacy?
Gosh, I don't know about legacy, but I mean, I've got a few things that I'm proud of. I'm proud of the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative. And I think I'm proud of the fact that even though it was very much William Hague's initiative, what I was able to do in developing the way that it was structured, it developed, and what we achieved is that now, 10 years on, it's still thriving. We just had a global summit in November last year in London, 10 years on. And I'm quite proud of that, because not every initiative has longevity and is still at the core of UK foreign policy. I'm very proud of the international protocol I oversaw the drafting of in The Hague, which still exists. It's been translated into numerous languages. It's being used in Ukraine on how you investigate warzone sexual violence. And I'm also proud of Ambassador for the Day. So I'm proud of having a project where I get letters from previous participants, and I have one of them framed on my wall. And she's called Marie, and she was one of the participants in Bulgaria. And she wrote to me after participating in this initiative to say she's a person with a disability. She said that for the first time she felt proud and valuable, and that she could achieve what she wanted to achieve. And she absolutely can. She was an amazing girl. And I'm quite proud of the fact that I made her feel like that. So it's wonderful to get that kind of feedback sometimes, and it brings you back to earth at that very personal sort of level as to what it is that you do. And actually the most valuable impact you can have is at that individual level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you share more on that note about the Ambassador for a Day program?
Yeah. Well, Ambassador for the Day, I mean, perhaps over the years, many embassies have done events which have been trying to bring in young people to understand diplomacy. And I think in 2015, when I got to Bulgaria, I really wanted to do something for International Women's Day, because for the last 20 years, I had been celebrating International Women's Day with sort of mixed emotions. So every year we have this sort of navel gazing about what lack of progress there's been and how much more there's to do. And I didn't want to do that every year. I wanted to do something which was more positive. And at the same time, I've been reading a lot of research about the confidence gap with girls, especially between 14 and 17, especially when girls' confidence dips and their male counterparts stay static or increases. And why is that? As sort of society takes effect and conditions girls at that age to risk less and conform more. So Ambassador for the Day was really about having a project or initiative which said to 14 to 17-year-old girls, we have confidence in you. We believe you can be a female leader. We want to give you that confidence and some skills. We want to introduce you to an amazing network of other women that might help you along the way. And we want to put the spotlight on the ability of young women to achieve change. And so it started off really as a competition, essay competition, where we recruited girls. And we had initially a debate about gender equality. The next year, I invited all the female ambassadors in Bulgaria to participate and mentor a girl. the year after that, I thought, well, why don't we take the girls to Vienna? And I knew the ambassador there. So I said, well, can I bring 20 girls with their chaperones? Can we go to the UN? Can we give them an experience about what it's like to work in multilateral setting if they wanted to represent Bulgaria overseas? And so it really went from there. And then when I came to Denmark, I wanted to continue it. So again, it was another essay competition looking at girls from different backgrounds from across Denmark, with a focus on how you can achieve change, whether it's on climate, on breaking biases, but very much trying to use and leverage the rest of the female diplomats here, who are all amazing, and other female leaders for the benefit of this group. And so that's how it's evolved. So, and this year we have, I think, 15 girls with a focus on climate. They've all sent an essay in or a video. And they're amazing, and the girls are amazing. And we've had a number of events with them, and we will continue to do so, training. And also we get so much from them, in terms of their perspectives on the world, on their ability to influence change and what they want from the future. So it's really very mutually beneficial, I have to say, and probably one of the most enjoyable things to work on.
That's great. And the congratulations also on continuing to host this initiative, because you said longevity is in a way showing legacy. And this is
exactly.
For sure.
And I think since we started it, we have some amazing branding. We've got an amazing team here who've developed it and the branding on it. But actually, I think about 40 embassies around the world are using our model, and British embassies. So it's great to see whether it's, Mexico or Germany follow the format and find it useful.
Fantastic. As a role model for me and for everybody else that is following your career, can you share more about what strategies have you employed or you want to share as advice to empower and uplift other women within the diplomatic and international relations sphere? You've mentioned for example, a trip to Vienna or sharing the Ambassador for a Day program. Do you feel we can do more, or do you feel we can have maybe a change of mindset when we look at how we can impact our girls to dream big?
Yeah. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the word role models, I have to say, because I think it minimizes the extent to which structural issues limit women's advancement. So the idea that women only need to see somebody called Sarah doing a CEO job or being a neuroscientist in order to have the imagination to imagine themselves into that role, I think minimizes the fact that actually the reason they're not in those roles is not just because they haven't seen anybody in those roles, but it's also because there are structural barriers. So I do think it's important to have role models, men and women, and think people to aspire to. But I think it's not only about seeing other people do those roles. I think it's also about how we treat the women who do those roles. So if you see women in high office who have an absolutely terrible time and are hounded out of office because of their experience, then that demotes women. So it doesn't necessarily suggest that other women would want to have that same treatment if they're, rational being, as we all are. So I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the role model idea. I do appreciate to some extent it's important, but more than that, I think it's about challenging orthodoxy and challenging things that you inherit. So if you're a female leader, you inherit an organization which has certain structures and procedures, but you don't have to perpetuate what you inherit. You can change the way that things are done, the art on the wall, the way that meetings are run, the procedures you have. You can start instigating better data collection. So you're looking at how women are promoted and are praised. So I think all of that is really important, as well as the fact that we need to see, women doing well and being recognized as doing well in very significant and high profile roles.
Absolutely. When it comes to, I would like to follow up and discuss a little bit more about the importance of recognizing structural and, to a certain extent, limitations that women have. When someone that is maybe not based in the UK or in Denmark or in Western Europe hears this interview, what should they then do for themselves to create a better opportunity area for them to develop. Is there anything that you feel would help also from a mindset perspective?
It's very hard to say sitting in a very privileged position here in Western Europe and in Denmark about that, because I don't know what some of the challenges are. Well, I do know because I've traveled extensively in many different areas of the world and worked on projects. So I understand some of the simple and basic challenges that there are to feeding your children, to putting a house over your head, to access to employment, to discrimination, to violence, all of the very daily realities that are faced. I think, what can we do from the position where we sit? And for me, that's to continue to invest in women and girls globally and to prioritize our development spend. Because when you invest in women and girls, you invest in communities, you invest in the heart of communities, and you often see exponential impacts and benefits as a result of investing in women and girls. So I think that's what we can do as a donor country and in a position of being able to support, and also offering solidarity to those women who are in more difficult environments, amplifying their story, raising their voices, offering our support in as much as we can. That's something else that we can do. But I don't underestimate the challenges that many women face throughout the world, not seen from my position of privilege here.
Thank you. In light of your experiences, what steps can organization and government take to create more inclusive environments that nurture and support women leaders?
It's a massive question, so I won't necessarily speak to government, but from an organizational perspective, because I'm head up an organization here, I think it's about, as I said, asking the questions, so looking at what you inherit, looking at the diversity you have, thinking about how you talk about inclusion, setting the right example, making sure you have the right data so that you know whether or not there is discrimination in the way your organization is functioning. So there's lots of things you can do from a leadership perspective, because I do believe it's top down, it's bottom up, it's individuals themselves. This whole idea about diversity and inclusion, it is, both organizational and individual. So I think there's lots you can do within an organization to encourage that mindset. And it's not just about gender equality. It's about all forms of diversity and inclusion, many of which are not visible, and I think that's another area I think a lot about, is invisible difference and the impact that can have, especially when you're thinking about neurodiversity issues and we don't often talk about those issues as much as we talk about gender diversity or race diversity.
Thank you for that. When it comes to your career and personal fulfillment, that's where I wanted to get to, because I did want to ask about we've talked earlier about legacy, but I do want to ask about your current setup and your feeling about personal fulfilling. Can you share with us a reflection on achieving balance in your career?
It's difficult. I would say I think one thing you have to accept is that you can't do it all. So you have to prioritize, and I prioritize time with my kids above washing and cleaning or cooking from scratch. You can't do everything. So I think this whole idea that you can have it all, which was very much part of the sort of social conversation in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, I just think the reality is very far from that. And actually we do a disservice to the people that come after us if we make it look achievable, because it isn't. You have to make choices and you can't do everything. And I think part of being honest is about saying that most of the time you just feel guilty because you're not fully at work. You're not fully at home. You're doing the best that you can with what you have, to your job, but also to your family and so on. So I think I just want to be honest about how difficult that is. And it is very difficult. And sometimes it looks like you've got all the balls in the air and other times you don't. But the reality is that very often you do drop balls, and that's life. But it isn't easy. And you do have to be realistic about what it is that you want to prioritize within the whole range of your family and working life.
Thank you for that. An important part of why we're also hosting this podcast is because when I started thinking about interviewing women that I admire in my network, for a very long time, I wonder, how did they do it? How can you become successful and move abroad and have all of these amazing experiences and look like you have it all? And it was an amazing experience to have the opportunity and the privilege of hearing some of their stories in details, to realize that it's not everything we see online or everything we imagine. It's not reality in the same way that we really envision it, meaning that, of course, we want to put our best foot forward and talk about important topics, but realistically, we can't have all the projects running perfectly at the same time, or all of our friends being happy, or all of our families being 100% fulfilled with the fact that we're there, because it's, we all have 24 hours in a day. I received so much feedback on the fact that honesty goes a long way for some of the women who thought that they're doing something wrong by not feeling that they have everything, because they were looking and they were feeling like, oh, I'm missing something because I don't look like that person, or I don't feel like that person.
But other people, that everyone else has their shit together or in control. I mean, I have to say, I'm mostly sleep deprived, and some days I do well, other days I don't. And I remember when I was doing the PSVI initiative, after, working extensively hard, I had a 2 and a 4-year-old. I was working very long days. At the end of that, I had pneumonia. I was physically ill for a long time. I was just physically, emotionally spent. So I didn't get the balance right. And it was a very hard period. But then I think back to that and I learned a lot from that. So now I'm a lot more resilient. I think I know my triggers. I know when I need to get more balance. So I do think you sometimes have to go through that imbalance to actually understand what balance looks like. And one of the things I have learned as well, I've been reading this really good article at the moment about the 7 forms of rest. So my kids go away every year to their grandparents for 5 or 6 days. It's the 5 or 6 days I'm on my own each year. They've just been away. I spent the 3 days lying on the sofa, eating crisps, drinking wine and watching TV. I did nothing else. And then I reflected on why I had done that. And I just realized I actually just needed an emotional rest. I didn't need to think about anyone else, provide for anybody else, support my parents or my children or my spouse or my embassy. All I needed was to be in the moment and to decompress. So I do think that all these different forms of rest, it's not just physical rest. It's that very key emotional rest that you need. And I think what you learn over the years is that you have to put yourself first. I think women are sometimes, it's hard to do that. And if you're tired, then you are not really providing support to others. So you have to give yourself that emotional rest. But I'm not very good at it, and I still don't do very well at it, even though I really want to learn that lesson, but I haven't learned it yet.
It's a journey. Yeah. And how is it? You can't give someone more if your glass is empty.
Yeah.
And then you cannot show up to the fullest.
Yeah.
If you feel deprived of whatever.
And sometimes you never realize that your glass is empty. It just happens. You've knocked it over, whatever. But actually, sometimes you either need a mirror or someone to tell you that you're running on empty if you haven't got that self-reflection. And I don't always have that.
And it's a very good reminder for our audience that it's okay if you don't figure that out from the beginning. Yeah. And it's okay to ask for help and say, hey, what do you think? I think I've been feeling like I'm not really there. Do you see anything? And then maybe that's where you have your moment of someone reflecting, mirroring what you maybe felt but didn't know how to verbalize.
Exactly.
Yeah. What advice would you give to women who aspire to excel in their careers, while also they want to nurture a fulfilling personal life? Because we just talked about the fact that you can't have it all. But there's also this idea that we should strive to find the best balance. Based on everything you've shared, what advice would you like to give to our audience looking back?
Just the same advice about prioritizing. You have to be thoughtful about prioritizing, and don't, kick yourself if your kids aren't having a meal made from scratch, or that you have to buy cookies to send in to school rather than make them, these things, in my view, in the big scheme of things, you know, it's not as important as playing with them or reading with them or being with them. So you just have to think about what your priorities are and be a bit thoughtful about it. I suppose that's would be my advice on achieving balance, and not being afraid to sort of develop a good support network and ask and make sure that others are also supporting and feeding in, and you're not trying to do too much.
Thank you. I want to ask this question because it's one of my favorite ones. Looking back, would you do anything differently?
In life or
yes.
Jeez, I mean, 100 million things differently. I mean, I think my only reflection would be I've come to diplomacy quite late. I would have loved to have been a diplomat earlier because it's just such an amazing experience and such a privilege to work in diplomacy. So I think I wish I had worked that out a bit earlier than I actually did. So pleased I got to it eventually, but maybe a little bit earlier would have been good.
Thank you for that. Your Excellency, we've reached the final 5 fire questions. So those are 5 questions that we will use to close off our interview. And the aim here is to give a little bit of advice on very specific questions such as books or role models and so on. So if you could encapsulate your diplomatic journey in one guiding principle, what would it be?
I think probably opportunity, because the Foreign Office gave me an opportunity to be an ambassador. I had no previous diplomatic experience. It gave my family an opportunity to live overseas and experience what that means. And then I think through things like Ambassador for the Day, I'm trying to give young girls an opportunity to see different things, to think about different things, to be different things. So I think probably opportunity would be my choice.
Thank you. Is there a book that has profoundly influenced your approach to leadership? And if so, how?
I'm not a big reader, I have to say, because I spend all day reading. So I like to watch films. But my childhood book, which I loved, was Anne of Green Gables. And I love that book by Lucy Montgomery because it's all about finding kindred spirits and about resilience. And I think if I think back at all the jobs I've had, I've always met kindred spirits, many of whom have been wonderful women striving to address some social change. And I think that book had a profound effect on me. Other than that, films, I think have always influenced me. I mentioned the sex traffic film, but I also love Shawshank Redemption. And that I saw that just at a time when I wanted to work on law, and also The Killing Fields, which I saw in the 80s when I was very much interested in what was going on in the world, and I was writing letters for Amnesty International and so on. So I think films also have the ability to really open your eyes and to provoke you, especially if they're quite hard-hitting.
Thank you. Who is your role model? I know that we've talked back and forth about role model, but what would you say qualifies as someone to aspire to?
I don't think, I think the thing with role models is everybody has faults, you know, not everybody, you can't encapsulate in one person all the things you admire. I admire qualities in different people. And so my role model would probably be a sort of a collection of parts of different people, and some of their verve and drive. And I mean, I love Madeleine Albright. I see her as kind of an ultimate diplomat, and so feminine as well as a very strong female advocate. I also love Maya Angelou. I love listening to her, but I love the Nigerian writer Adichie. I think she does and says amazing things about stereotyping. She has just such a way of encapsulating, you know, such wise words in such pithy quotes. So I love all those. My mum is a massive role model for me. Amazing sort of strong woman who taught me a lot of terms of values. So, and also men. I've had some amazing bosses who've been very supportive of me and have been massive advocates for gender equality as well. So I think it's important to think about women, but also, you know, that you can find those qualities in men also.
Thank you. If you could transport yourself to any historical moment, which would it be and why?
This is a really difficult question. I've just been watching again the Made in Dagenham film, which was a film about the 187 workers in the Ford factory in Dagenham in 1968 who went out on strike because they were paid much less than their male counterparts. And at the end of their strike, Barbara Castle, who was the minister at the time, brought the strike to the end with the promise of the Equal Pay Act, which then came in 1970. And I know we're still struggling with gender pay imbalance, but these women were really at the beginning of that. And I would have loved to have been there on the day that the strike ended with the commitment towards equal pay being announced by the government minister to see what that felt like.
Fantastic. Thank you. And our final question. Looking ahead, what legacy do you hope to leave behind as an advocate for justice, equality, and diplomacy?
I don't know, just that it mattered that I'd done the jobs that I have done. Not necessarily that I was keeping the seat warm, but the things I chose to do with the platform I had an impact. Because I think the thing about being an ambassador is there'll be many ambassadors as are on the walls of this residence before you and many after you. And much of what we do is standard, representing our country to the best of our endeavours and so on. But there also is this discretionary capacity to choose to do other things. And I think that's been a massive privilege for me to be able to use that platform to convene, to support women, to have the Ambassador for the Day campaign and other initiatives. A huge privilege to be given the opportunity to do that. So I hope that will be something that matters post my departure.
Fantastic. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. This has been an honor. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for being an advocate for girls and women everywhere and for really using your platform for the greater good.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to have you here.
And thank you all for following us today. Stay tuned for more inspiring interviews with role models.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode of FemLead Podcast. Share the news with your friends and follow us on social media at FemLead Podcast everywhere.